Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Mr. Scarer. Tonight, we're going on an intriguing journey deep into the heart of Appalachia, where the shadows grow long and intriguing legends await in every corner. These aren't just stories meant to spook campers. These are 10 true and deeply unsettling accounts of hikers and adventurers who encountered the inexplicable on America's most enigmatic trails. You'll hear about lives dramatically altered by a single moment in the woods, the mysterious vanishing of hikers, spine-chilling screams in the night, and a sense of evil that isn't always visible. If you're new here, please consider subscribing to Mr. Scare for your daily dose of true horror content that might just keep you awake at night. Don't forget to click the notification bell to be alerted whenever darkness calls. Now, let's step into the shadows of the deep Appalachian woods together, where civilization fades and terror awaits. Hello, I'm David Fletcher, and for over 15 years, I've had the privilege of leading search and rescue operations in the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. Through all those years, I've witnessed hikers making every possible mistake. I've pulled people from ravines, guided lost souls back to marked trails, and recovered bodies from falls that could have been avoided with the right preparation. Yet, nothing could have prepared me for the experience involving Rebecca Mitchell in October 2019. Rebecca, a 28-year-old nature photographer from Richmond, had garnered a decent following by capturing the beauty of Virginia's wild places. She wasn't just a casual weekend warrior, outfitted with expensive gear. She truly knew her way around the mountains, having hiked and camped in Appalachia since her teenage years with her father. She was well equipped for her outdoor adventures. When she embarked on what was meant to be a routine 3-day solo trek along the Appalachian Trail near Shenandoah, everything seemed perfectly set for another successful journey. Her plan was straightforward, starting at the Thornton Gap entrance. She would hike south for about 18 miles over 3 days, exiting at Swift Run Gap, where her car awaited her. She even arranged a shuttle service for drop-off and pickup, which is standard for section hikers. The weather forecast was promising. With clear skies and temperatures in the 60s, Rebecca carried a GPS device, a satellite communicator, extra food, and the proper gear, all while filing a detailed itinerary with the Park Service. She was following all the guidelines. Each evening and morning, she was supposed to check in via her satellite device. The first day went just as planned, with her evening message at 6:30 reporting good progress and a peaceful night at her designated campsite near Hazeltop Mountain. Her morning update came right on time as well, confirming she was breaking camp and continuing south. That was the last communication anyone received from Rebecca Mitchell. When she didn't check in that evening, her sister Jennifer, who was her emergency contact, decided to wait until the next morning before reporting it. Perhaps the device malfunctioned, or maybe Rebecca was just too tired to send a message. However, when the morning check-in didn't come either, Jennifer contacted the Park Service, and by noon on the third day, we launched a full-scale search and rescue operation. I led the initial team to Rebecca's last known position. We discovered her second campsite exactly as her itinerary outlined, about 8 miles south of her starting point. The site was where it should have been, clean and maintained. Her tent was packed away properly, the fire pit was cold and cleared, and there were no signs of a struggle or hasty departure. Everything indicated she had broken camp normally that morning and continued her hike. But this was where the ordinary ended and the nightmare began. As we followed the trail south from her campsite, assuming we would find Rebecca somewhere between there and her planned third night stop, we were met with unexpected turns. The Appalachian Trail in that section is well kept and clearly marked, featuring gentle slopes through beautiful deciduous forests. An experienced hiker like Rebecca should have been able to traverse the remaining miles without any issues. Instead, about 2 miles south of her campsite, We stumbled upon Rebecca's water bottle, a bright blue Nalgene, scattered off the main trail. It had been either thrown or dropped around 30 feet east of the path, with no visible trail leading to it. There were no broken branches or disturbed underbrush. It was simply there, almost as if it had fallen from the sky. Immediately, we widened our search, forming a grid to cover the area around the water bottle. Within an hour, we found more of Rebecca's belongings scattered about in a puzzling pattern. Her hiking poles showed up nearly a quarter-mile further south, across the trail from where the water bottle lay. They were intact, simply lying parallel to each other about 15 feet into the woods. We later discovered her camera bag, valuable gear she used for her photography, hanging from a tree branch nearly 12 feet off the ground. We couldn't figure out how it got there and required climbing gear to retrieve it. The odd pattern continued every few hundred yards. We discovered another piece of her equipment seemingly strewn at random through the forest. Her jacket was found wrapped around a tree trunk a full mile from the main path. Her backup batteries were neatly stacked beside a creek, which needed a steep descent to access. Her food bag was found tied to a branch over a ravine. It seemed impossible that anyone could have placed it there without climbing expertise. What unnerved us most wasn't just the random distribution of her belongings, but their pristine condition. None showed signs of damage from animals or the elements. They weren't torn, chewed, or weathered, looking as if someone had deliberately set them in their locations like a trail of breadcrumbs in the forest. Yet, there weren't any human footprints leading to them. We enlisted tracking dogs, experienced handlers, and canines trained to follow human scent, even in challenging conditions. The dogs picked up Rebecca's trail from her campsite and could follow it for about 2 miles along the main trail, right up to where we had found the water bottle. Beyond that point, however, the trail simply vanished. The dogs appeared frustrated, circling and whining, unable to detect where she had gone. We expanded our search area, covering over 50 square miles around Rebecca's last known position. Additional teams, helicopters, and volunteers from local hiking clubs joined the effort. For 6 days, more than 200 people combed every ravine, creek bed, and ridge in the area, checking every cave, overlook, or potential shelter for an injured hiker. The search turned up more of Rebecca's belongings, dispersed over an increasingly broad area. Her sleeping bag was located 4 miles east of the trail, remarkably dry despite heavy rain the night before, positioned on a rock ledge requiring mountaineering skills to reach. Her first aid kit was found inside a hollow tree trunk, placed so precisely that it couldn't have fallen there naturally. The most unsettling discovery was her GPS device, located on day 5 of the search. It was nearly 7 miles from where she should have been, in a small clearing known for unusual wildlife behavior. The device still worked and had a nearly full battery, even though it was missing for over a week. When we checked the stored track log, it showed Rebecca moving along the trail until the point where her signal was lost, with no record of how the device traveled further 7 miles through dense forest to end up in that clearing. On day 6, we found Rebecca's backpack hanging upside down from a tree branch over a steep gorge, suspended by its shoulder straps about 20 feet above a rocky creek bed. The pack was intact and contained most of her remaining gear: her stove, sleeping pad, extra clothes, and emergency supplies, everything neatly packed away, just like an experienced hiker would do. However, the backpack posed a puzzle that defied explanation. The tree it hung from was a mature oak with smooth bark and no low branches. The lowest branch, thick enough for support, was around 30 feet above the ground, and there weren't any nearby trees to allow for climbing access. We consulted professional arborists, and they confirmed our suspicions. No one could have placed that backpack there without specialized equipment that Rebecca never carried. The pack's position also contradicted basic physics. It should have swung freely in the wind, But during hours of observation, it stayed perfectly still, even amid strong gusts. When we finally retrieved it using ropes and climbing gear, the straps bore no signs of wear or stretching that would have occurred from bearing weight for days. Unfortunately, we never found Rebecca Mitchell. After 2 weeks of intensive searching, the official effort was called off, but volunteers continued for months. Her family engaged private investigators and psychics, organized extra search parties, and offered considerable rewards for any information. Yet, none of it led back to Rebecca, only more of her scattered belongings arising in increasingly baffling locations. The case remains an open missing person investigation, but everyone involved in the search and rescue operation came away changed. We had all worked numerous similar cases and understood the harsh reality that not every lost hiker can be found alive. But Rebecca's case was different. The pattern of her belongings suggested deliberate placement instead of random distribution. The locations seemed too precise and too physically challenging to reach by mere accident or animal actions. Still, there was no evidence of human involvement. No footprints or signs indicating how someone could traverse that terrain carrying Rebecca's equipment. Some colleagues speculated about what had happened. Perhaps Rebecca experienced a psychological break and scattered her belongings before wandering off trail to an undiscovered hidden location. Maybe she had been abducted by someone knowledgeable about the area and skilled in climbing. Or maybe she simply fell into an underground cave system we missed during our searches. However, these theories failed to explain all the evidence. They didn't clarify how her camera bag ended up 12 feet high in a tree, why her backpack hung over a gorge in defiance of gravity, or how her GPS device traveled 7 miles without a recorded track log. The truth is that Rebecca Mitchell vanished in a manner that challenges everything we think we understand about disappearances in the wilderness. Her case has become something of a legend among search and rescue teams across Appalachia. A reminder that these ancient mountains still hold mysteries we may never comprehend. I still hike those trails and continue to lead search and rescue operations whenever hikers go missing. But I now find myself looking over my shoulder more often, listening closely to the sounds that might not just be the wind rustling through the trees. Because somewhere out there in the Blue Ridge Mountains, something took Rebecca Mitchell and left behind a riddle that haunts everyone who tried to solve it. The mountains hold their secrets, sometimes darker than we care to fathom. Hey there, I'm Danny Torres, and I want to share an incredible experience I had while backpacking in the Tennessee mountains back in September 2020. I had been hiking solo for over a decade, covering numerous miles across the Appalachian Range, believing I knew those mountains well enough to tackle anything they could present. But oh boy, was I mistaken! I planned to hike a section of the Cumberland Trail that meanders through the stunning wilderness areas east of Crossville. This area is known for its gorgeous limestone bluffs, hidden waterfalls, and deep hollows that many folks don't get to experience. The trail weaves through several cave systems formed over millennia by underground streams, carving out the bedrock. I had explored some of these caves before, always sticking to the entrances and never delving into the deeper parts without proper gear. On that Friday morning, the weather was perfect as I set out. The forecast promised clear skies and mild temperatures, with no rain expected until Sunday evening. I packed light, taking everything I needed for 3 days: my tent, sleeping bag, food, water purification tablets, first aid supplies, and a trusty headlamp with spare batteries. A backup flashlight and an emergency whistle were also standard for solo hiking in remote areas. The first day went smoothly as I trekked about 8 miles through Tennessee's beautiful terrain, setting up camp that evening by a small creek surrounded by old hemlocks. It was a peaceful night, with only the gentle sound of flowing water and the occasional hoot of a barred owl in the dark. Saturday morning, however, brought unexpected news that things wouldn't go as planned. I woke up to the low rumble of thunder in the distance, and upon checking the sky, I saw dark clouds gathering on the western horizon. The weather forecast had missed the mark. A significant storm was approaching quickly, and judging by those clouds, it promised to be quite fierce. I had two options: pack up right away and try to hike out before the storm hit, or find a place to shelter and wait it out. Given that the nearest trailhead was still 12 miles away and the clouds were moving swiftly, I opted to seek natural shelter and ride it out. That led me to the cave that would change everything. I had spotted the cave entrance earlier that morning while filtering water from the creek. It was tucked into a limestone bluff about 50 yards upstream from my campsite, partially obscured by rhododendrons and fallen logs. The entrance was large enough to walk through upright, and it looked like it extended far enough back into the hillside to offer solid protection from the rain and wind. By noon, the storm was almost upon me. The wind had picked up, bending trees ominously, and I could see lightning flickering in the wall of dark clouds. I quickly stowed my gear and made my way to the cave entrance, arriving just as the first heavy raindrops began to fall. The cave opened into a space about the size of a small room, with a fairly level floor covered in fine sand and small stones. The natural light from the entrance was enough for me to set up my sleeping bag and organize my gear without needing my headlamp. The ceiling was high enough for me to stand comfortably, and there were several flat rocks that served as convenient seats and tables. All in all, it seemed like the perfect shelter from the storm. The entrance faced away from the prevailing wind, so rain wouldn't blow inside, even during heavy downpours. The chamber kept cool but was not cold, maintaining a comfortable temperature that didn't waste my body heat. Most importantly, it was completely dry, with no signs of water seepage or flooding from previous storms. I settled in, listening to the storm rage outside while I munched on lunch and read a book I had packed. Thunder and lightning rang out for hours, mixed with wind howling through the trees like freight trains overhead. Rain poured down in sheets, loud enough for me to hear it even deep inside the cave. At some point late in the afternoon, while the storm remained at its peak, I first noticed I wasn't alone in the cave. I had been reading by the light from the entrance when I heard what sounded like breathing from somewhere deeper within the cave system. It wasn't the steady, rhythmic breathing you might expect from a sleeping animal. It was irregular and labored, as if something was struggling for breath. The sound was faint and intermittent, almost drowned out by the storm outside, but it was definitely there. My first thought was that another hiker had sought shelter in the cave and had settled into one of the deeper chambers. It's not unusual for multiple people to take cover in natural shelters during severe weather. I called out a friendly hello, wanting to introduce myself and make sure the other person was okay. But the breathing stopped instantly when I spoke, as if whoever or whatever it was had suddenly become attentive. No one replied, and as a few minutes of silence passed, I started to wonder if I had imagined it. You know how storm winds can play tricks on your ears in caves. I decided I had probably just heard one of those effects. But about 20 minutes later, the breathing returned, closer this time, definitely coming from inside the cave rather than from the wind. I could hear its wet, raspy quality echoing through the space, reminding me of how my grandfather breathed during his final weeks when pneumonia was filling his lungs. I called out again, louder this time, asking if anyone was there and if they needed help. Yet again, the breathing halted the moment I spoke, but this time I heard something else, a shuffling sound, as if feet or something was dragging across the sandy cave floor. Whatever was back there had moved in reaction to my voice. I quickly grabbed my headlamp and turned it on, aiming the beam toward the back of the chamber, where the cave crept into darkness. The light revealed a narrow passage leading deeper into the hillside, sloping downward gently. The walls were smooth limestone, shaped by centuries of water flow, and the floor was covered with the same fine sand I sat on. Although my headlamp didn't illuminate much of the passage, I could still hear that raspy breathing echoing from somewhere down there. This was definitely not wind or some acoustic trick. Something alive was lurking in the shadows, breathing like a sick creature, but refusing to respond to human voices. You see, I've always had a curious nature, which is why I enjoy solo hiking in remote spots. Typically, I would have been tempted to check out the source of those sounds, but the quality of that breathing, the wet, labored echoing through the cave, sent every survival instinct I'd owned during years of wilderness travel into overdrive. Instead of investigating further, I moved my gear closer to the cave entrance, where I could keep an eye on both the storm outside and the dark passage leading deeper underground. I kept my headlamp within easy reach and made sure my whistle was attached to my jacket so I could grab it quickly if needed. The breathing continued throughout the afternoon, sometimes closer and sometimes farther away, as if whatever was making the sound was navigating a network of connected passages. Occasionally, I'd hear that shuffling noise again, always coming from another direction, suggesting the cave system was more extensive than it seemed from the main chamber. As evening approached and the storm began to die down, I hoped that whatever was down there would stay hidden, while I spent the night in the outer chamber. The rain was still too heavy to consider leaving the cave, and I had no desire to set up a tent in muddy conditions with darkness closing in. My plan was to stay alert through the night and head out first thing in the morning when there was better visibility. But around midnight, long after the storm had passed and the forest became quiet, I woke to find that whatever had been breathing in the depths had moved much closer to the main chamber. I could hear it just beyond the range of my light. The breathing had changed too, becoming quicker and more excited, like something that had been patiently waiting and was now anticipating an opportunity. Between the labored breaths, I caught faint sounds that might have been whispers, or could have just been air moving through damaged vocal cords. Lying perfectly still in my sleeping bag, I tried to control my own breaths and heartbeat while listening to whatever was lurking just past my headlamp's light. Every instinct told me not to move or make any noise that might draw attention to my exact location. But I also knew that lying there helpless wasn't a sustainable plan. Slowly, I reached for my headlamp and switched it on, directing the beam toward the source of the breathing sounds. What I saw in that brief moment of light is something I'll never be able to completely process or explain, even after years of trying to make sense of what happened in that cave. The figure peering back at me from the darkness wasn't human, yet it wasn't entirely animal either. It stood upright like a person, but its proportions were painfully distorted. Its limbs were too long and bent at angles that human joints simply couldn't achieve. Its skin appeared pale and wet, almost translucent, stretched over a body that seemed too big for what covered it. But it was the face that will haunt me forever. It had features that were nearly human, arranged in a way that was almost recognizable but distorted, creating a profoundly unsettling effect. Its eyes were far too large and too widely spaced, reflecting my headlamp beam like those of a nocturnal animal. The mouth was open in what could be interpreted as surprise at being discovered, revealing teeth that were neither human nor animal, but something altogether different. The creature emitted a sound when my light hit it, a mix between a scream and a growl, capturing elements of both human speech and animal communication. Then, as if shot from a cannon, it darted with speed that shouldn't have been possible for something of its size, disappearing back into the deeper cave passages with a scrabble that echoed through the chambers. I couldn't sleep for the rest of that night. I huddled against the cave wall near the entrance, headlamp in hand, listening to sounds emanating from deeper within the hillside. At times, the labored breathing echoed from multiple directions, hinting that either several of those things were down there, or the cave system connected to other entrances, with more of them around. As dawn approached, the sounds ceased entirely. The sudden quiet was almost more unsettling than the breathing, because it seemed to imply that whatever lived in those caves had either left through other exits, or was lying in wait for me to let down my guard. I swiftly packed my gear, being as quiet as possible, and then made my way out of the cave into the early morning gray light. The storm had cleared, leaving the forest dripping and feeling fresh, but there was no relief in seeing the daylight again. I couldn't shake the feeling that something unseen was watching me from the shadows as I put on my pack and began hiking toward the nearest trailhead. I covered the 12 miles back to my car in record time, propelled by the urgent need to put as much distance as possible between me and whatever inhabited that cave system. I haven't returned to that part of the Cumberland Trail since, nor do I plan to ever go back. That experience has completely changed my perspective on solo hiking in remote areas. I still adore the mountains, but I no longer take for granted understanding the creatures that inhabit the deep places of the earth where humans rarely venture. There are things in the Appalachian wilderness that have existed long before humans arrived and have learned to steer clear of us, while remembering that we are not the only intelligent beings in those mountains. My name is Jenny Walsh, and I'm 26 years old. A couple of years ago, I decided to hike a section of the Appalachian Trail in North Carolina to help me cope with some tough changes in my life. I had just ended a long relationship, lost my job due to downsizing, and I felt the need for some time in nature to figure out my next steps. Solo hiking has always been my way of sorting through my thoughts, and I've found solace in the mountains before. I had planned a 5-day hike from Newfound Gap to Damascus, covering around 60 miles of some of the most stunning landscapes on the Appalachian Trail. This route would take me through the beautiful Great Smoky Mountains National Park and into the wilderness areas of eastern Tennessee and southwestern Virginia. I had hiked parts of this trail before on weekend trips, but never alone or for such a long distance. I began my hike on a Tuesday morning in early October, when the fall colors were vibrant and the weather was perfect for long days outdoors. The parking area at Newfound Gap was quite empty, with just a few other cars belonging to day hikers and tourists. After signing the trail register and shouldering my pack, I started my hike north along the White Blaze Trail that would be my home for the next 5 days. On that first day, everything unfolded just as I had hoped. I trekked about 12 miles through some breathtaking scenery in the southeast, stopping often to snap pictures of the autumn leaves and admire views that stretched for miles over the mountain ridges. The trail was bustling with other hikers in the morning, but as the day wore on and I ventured further from the road access points, the crowd thinned out. That evening, I set up camp at a designated backcountry site near the Tennessee-North Carolina border, sharing the space with an older couple from Florida who were hiking in the same direction, though at a slower pace. We had a nice chat over dinner about trail conditions and weather forecasts. Then we went to our tents for a peaceful night beneath the stars. The next morning, as I was packing up and preparing to continue north, I noticed a man about 50 yards down the trail, partially hidden by a grove of maple trees, but clearly able to see my campsite. At first glance, he seemed to be adjusting his pack and getting ready to start his hike. There was nothing overtly threatening about him, and it's common to run into other hikers at popular camping areas. But something about the way he was watching me made me uneasy. He wasn't admiring the scenery or organizing his gear as most hikers do during breaks. His focus was solely on me. When our eyes met, He didn't look away or greet me with the customary wave shared between trail goers. After finishing my packing, I began hiking north, thinking our paths would naturally separate as we followed our different schedules. The Appalachian Trail attracts hundreds of hikers during peak seasons, and brief encounters with strangers are part of the experience. I thought he'd either pass me during the day if he was moving quicker or fall behind if I picked up the pace. However, he kept a constant distance of about a quarter-mile behind me throughout the entire second day. I first noticed he was trailing me when I stopped for lunch at a scenic overlook about 6 miles north of where I camped the night before. I had been enjoying a sandwich and the beautiful view for roughly 20 minutes when I spotted him approaching along the trail below. Rather than continuing past or stopping to take in the view himself, he left the main trail and settled on another rock formation, seemingly resting but clearly keeping an eye on me. When I finished my lunch and resumed hiking, he lingered for a few minutes before following along. Looking back from the next ridge, I could see he maintained that same quarter-mile distance, mirroring my pace and stopping whenever I paused. By mid-afternoon, I was convinced that his presence was too coincidental to be a mere accident. I decided to test my theory by taking an extended break at a trail shelter. I sat inside the three-walled structure, pretending to read while secretly watching the trail behind me. Sure enough, he materialized within 20 minutes, positioning himself in a spot where he could observe the shelter without being too obvious. I felt compelled to confront the situation directly. I approached him and offered a friendly greeting, inquiring about his hiking plans and destination. Most hikers are happy to chat about their routes and share trail info, but this man was different. He responded to my questions with one-word answers or short phrases, sharing no information about where he was heading or how long he intended to stay on the trail. What unsettled me most was the way he looked at me while we conversed. His gaze avoided meeting mine directly, fixating instead on various parts of my body, which made my skin crawl. When I asked if he was hiking alone, he smiled in a way that didn't reach his eyes and mentioned he was always on the lookout for hiking companions, especially women familiar with the trail. I made a quick excuse about needing to cover more ground before dark and resumed hiking north. But our brief exchange had confirmed my worst suspicions. This wasn't a coincidence. He was intentionally following me, and his intentions were far from innocent. My third day on the trail quickly turned into a mission to evade someone who seemed to know the trail as well as I did. I tried varying my pace, taking longer breaks in areas with limited visibility, and even briefly deviating from the main trail to explore a side path to a waterfall. Nothing worked. Despite my efforts, he reappeared behind me within hours, maintaining his distance and watching my every move with an intensity that grew more alarming with each tick of the clock. That evening, I chose a campsite that wasn't marked on any official maps, a small flat spot by a creek, hidden from the main trail by thick rhododendron bushes. I set up my tent quietly, hoping he would pass by without noticing where I had decided to spend the night. Unfortunately, I was wrong once again. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of footsteps circling my campsite. The steps were slow and deliberate, pausing frequently as if someone were studying my tent. I lay perfectly still in my sleeping bag, trying to control my breathing while I listened to the footsteps move around the perimeter of my hidden camp. They stopped right outside my tent. I could hear someone breathing on the other side of the thin nylon wall separating me from whoever was out there. Then, I heard a voice, barely above a whisper, saying my name. He knew my name. I never revealed it during our brief chat, which meant he had either overheard other hikers using it or had some other way of gathering personal information about me. The realization that he had been collecting details about me while trailing me intensified my fear. I couldn't sleep for the rest of that night, lying in my tent, listening for any signs he might still be lurking nearby, waiting for dawn when I would need to pack up and continue. I thought about using my emergency satellite communicator to ask for help, but I was in a remote area, and it would take hours for rescuers to find me. I wasn't sure what I would even tell them, since nothing had escalated into a direct threat yet. When morning arrived, I quietly packed my gear and left my hidden campsite before sunrise, hoping to get a few hours ahead of him while he was still asleep. I hiked faster than I ever had before, putting miles between me and my pursuer. For most of the fourth day, I thought I had finally outpaced him. I didn't see him behind me on the trail, and I began to feel hopeful he had chosen a different direction. Once again, I was wrong. Late in the afternoon, while approaching a trail shelter where I intended to spend my final night, I realized he hadn't been behind me at all. He had been following parallel to my route through the forest, using his knowledge of the terrain to stay ahead of me while remaining hidden. He was waiting for me at the shelter. I spotted him as soon as I emerged from the tree line into the clearing where the three-walled structure sat beside a small stream. He was sitting against the wall, his pack beside him, and his gear spread out as if he'd been there for hours. When he saw me, he smiled and waved as if we were long-lost friends suddenly reuniting. I stopped about 50 feet from the shelter, close enough to see he was no longer pretending about his intentions. His eyes had a predatory glint, triggering every survival instinct within me. I noticed a knife at his belt that hadn't been visible during our previous encounters, and his body language suggested he was poised for a confrontation. We stared at each other across that clearing for what felt like an eternity, but was likely only a few minutes. He didn't approach, but it was clear he had no plans to leave. The shelter's layout meant anyone inside would be trapped against the back wall with only one exit. Exactly the kind of tactical advantage someone with ill intentions would desire. I resolved to keep hiking instead of camping at the shelter, even with darkness just hours away. I told him I was continuing north to meet friends who were expecting me, hoping that mentioning other people might discourage him. He didn't seem to believe me, but also didn't try to stop me from leaving. I hiked well into the night, using my headlamp to navigate a trail that became increasingly risky in the dark. I was fatigued, scared, and making poor judgments. But the certainty that stopping near that man might lead to something awful kept me moving. Around midnight, I reached a road crossing where the Appalachian Trail intersects with a rural highway. There was a small convenience store and gas station catering to hikers, and although it was closed for the night, the security lights were still on, and I spotted a payphone. I dialed 911 from that phone and waited in the parking lot under the lights until a sheriff's deputy arrived. I explained to the officer that I had been followed and stalked for 3 days by a man whose behavior had become increasingly threatening. The deputy took my statement and drove me to a motel in the nearest town, where I spent the rest of the night with the door locked and a chair braced against it. The next morning, park rangers and sheriff's deputies searched the vicinity around the shelter where I had last seen my stalker. They found signs that someone had camped there, but he was nowhere to be found. They also discovered items that clearly belonged to me scattered around the shelter. A hairband I had lost 2 days prior, an energy bar wrapper I had discarded, and a piece of fabric torn from my jacket by a tree branch. It turned out he had been collecting keepsakes of me throughout his pursuit. The authorities took my case seriously and increased patrols in the area, but they never managed to find the man who had followed me through the North Carolina mountains. I never found out his name or what he intended to do if he had cornered me in a more secluded spot. Although I still enjoy hiking, I never do so alone anymore or on remote trails where help would be hours away. The experience opened my eyes to the fact that the wilderness can hold more than just natural dangers. The isolation that makes solo hiking so appealing can also create a vulnerability that may be exploited by the wrong individual. The mountains remain beautiful, but they no longer feel like the safe sanctuary I once believed them to be. The mysterious disappearance of Mike and Lisa Thompson, a couple in their 40s from Columbus, Ohio, sparked what local officials would eventually label as one of the most unsettling cases in the history of West Virginia wilderness search and rescue operations. The Thompsons were experienced hikers with over 15 years of passion for backcountry camping and wilderness navigation, making their case even more perplexing for investigators, who dedicated months piecing together the events of their last known days. Mike was an engineering supervisor at a manufacturing firm, while Lisa taught biology at a local high school. They had no children, choosing instead to spend their free time outdoors, particularly enjoying long-distance hikes in remote wilderness areas. They had previously tackled sections of the Appalachian Trail, the Pacific Crest Trail, and various challenging routes through national parks across the western U.S. Friends and family described them as cautious and well-prepared hikers who never took unnecessary risks. In October 2018, Mike and Lisa set out for a 5-day backpacking adventure through the Dolly Sods wilderness area in the Monongahela National Forest. Their chosen path would guide them through some of West Virginia's most stunning and secluded landscapes, covering about 40 miles of diverse terrains including vast meadows, dense forests, and rocky overlooks with breathtaking views of the surrounding mountains. They departed Columbus on a Friday morning, traveling 4 hours to West Virginia in Lisa's Honda CR-V. After checking into a motel near Davis that evening, they enjoyed dinner at a local diner and conversed with several fellow hikers about trail conditions and the weather. Witnesses noted that Mike and Lisa seemed relaxed and eager for their hike, showing no signs of anxiety. On Saturday morning, they drove to the Dolly Sods trailhead, parking their vehicle in the designated overnight area and signing in at 8:15 a.m., outlining their planned route and an expected return on Wednesday afternoon. Their itinerary revealed they would stick to established trails for the first 3 days before navigating a more challenging cross-country path through less frequented areas. Park rangers later remarked that Mike and Lisa's route was sensible and aligned with their documented experience. The week's weather forecast was promising, with clear skies and mild temperatures predicted through Tuesday, allowing them to wrap up their hike before expected rain on Wednesday. The first sign that something was amiss appeared when Lisa's Honda remained at the trailhead past their planned return date. As park regulations required hikers to check out at the ranger station if their plans shifted, concern grew, especially given Mike and Lisa's meticulous adherence to safety protocols. By Thursday evening, when they hadn't returned, park personnel began preliminary inquiries. On Friday morning, Lisa's sister received a call from park rangers, notifying her of their absence, with their vehicle still in the parking area. She confirmed that the couple had not reached out since starting their hike, which was unusual given their habit of texting or calling during longer trips as soon as they had cell service. A search and rescue operation commenced on Friday afternoon, with an initial team of 4 experienced park rangers and 2 volunteers from a local mountain rescue organization. They followed the couple's planned route, anticipating they would either be somewhere along established trails or at one of the campsites listed in their itinerary. The first campsite was found exactly where Mike and Lisa had intended to stay Saturday night, and it showed clear signs of appropriate camping practices. The fire ring had been responsibly used and completely extinguished, with no signs of food waste or improper litter. Tent impressions in the ground indicated where they had set up camp, and everything suggested they left Sunday morning as originally planned. However, the second campsite, where Mike and Lisa should have camped on Sunday night, told a different story. Evidence indicated the site had recently been used, but camping practices observed there were inconsistent with what had been found at the first site. The fire ring contained partially burnt garbage and food waste, completely contradicting Mike and Lisa's known camp habits. Impressions in the soil suggested a tent had been pitched in a location that seasoned hikers wouldn't choose due to poor drainage and exposure to wind. More alarming was the discovery of a hiking boot print belonging to Lisa near the fire ring. The unique tread matched the boots she wore when they signed in at the trailhead, but the print seemed to have been made by someone walking unsteadily, suggesting an injury or distress. There were no corresponding prints from Mike's boots nearby. As the search team continued along the planned route past the second campsite, they stumbled upon the most alarming evidence yet. About 2 miles from where they should have spent Sunday night, the couple's path intersected with an old logging road not shown on most current maps. Here, searchers discovered Mike's backpack hanging from a tree branch, accompanied by a handwritten sign stating, "Trail closed. Detour required. Ranger station 3 miles." The sign appeared to be on official-looking paper and had the National Forest Service letterhead, but park rangers quickly identified it as a fraud. There had been no trail closures in that area, and the nearest ranger station was actually over 15 miles away in another direction. This indicated that someone had deliberately created a fake detour sign to mislead hikers away from established trails. Mike's backpack contained most of his essential supplies, including water bottles, food, and navigation gear. There were no signs of struggle or damage on the pack, indicating it had been intentionally removed and hung there. Notably, Lisa's pack was nowhere to be found in the vicinity, and there were no clear footprints or other clues to indicate which direction the couple might have taken after encountering the fraudulent sign. Consequently, the search was expanded to include law enforcement from the West Virginia State Police and additional search and rescue teams from nearby counties. The discovery of the fake sign transformed what initially seemed to be a straightforward missing persons case into a potential criminal investigation. It appeared that Mike and Lisa had unwittingly walked into a trap. Over the next week, more than 60 searchers scoured hundreds of square miles of wilderness around where Mike's pack had been found. Helicopters conducted reconnaissance missions over vast, inaccessible areas, and search dogs were brought in to follow any available scent trails, but were unable to pick up consistent tracks beyond where the fake sign had been placed. The investigation expanded to include interviews with other hikers who had been in the area at that time. Several reported encounters with a man dressed like a park ranger at various spots throughout the wilderness. This individual approached hikers to discuss trail conditions, provide directions, and offer navigation assistance. However, park personnel confirmed that no uniformed rangers had been patrolling the remote areas where these encounters were reported. Witness descriptions were consistent enough to create a composite sketch of the suspect, a white male in his 50s, of average height and build, dressed in standard National Forest Service attire and carrying seemingly official identification. Further investigation revealed that someone had been impersonating a park ranger for an extended period, potentially months, throughout the region. This person appeared to have in-depth knowledge of local trails, camping spots, and wilderness regulations, engaging with hikers, especially couples and solo women, offering assistance that seemed legitimate and helpful. Alarmingly, interviews with prior contact witnesses revealed a pattern where the fake ranger displayed particular interest in hikers' planned routes and schedules. He regularly inquired about camping locations, duration of stay, and whether hikers had informed anyone of their specific itineraries. At the time, many hikers had interpreted his inquiries as standard safety questions from a concerned park employee. Eventually, searchers uncovered a makeshift campsite in a remote valley about 5 miles from where Mike's backpack had been located. This site showed signs of recent occupation, including food scraps, personal items, and improvised shelter materials. Most crucially, they found Lisa's hiking boot and several items of clothing that her sister confirmed belonged to both Mike and Lisa. The campsite exhibited signs of restraint and confinement activities. Trees in the area bore rope marks, suggesting they had been used to anchor binding materials. Disturbed soil indicated that holes had been dug and filled in, possibly for waste disposal or hiding evidence. Overall, the site's condition suggested it had been used for purposes far beyond typical camping. Despite extensive searches of the area, including potential burial site excavations and thorough inspections of numerous caves and rocky formations, the bodies of Mike and Lisa Thompson were never found. The investigation persisted for months, following up on countless leads and tips from the public, but no arrests were made regarding their disappearance. This case highlighted significant security vulnerabilities in remote wilderness areas where visitors could easily be targeted by impersonators. Consequently, park services across the region introduced new protocols requiring hikers to verify the identity of anyone claiming to be a certified employee and intensified patrols in areas where suspicious activity had been reported. The Thompson case remains open and unresolved, with their families still hopeful for answers about their final days in the West Virginia wilderness. Investigators unveiled evidence of a skilled predator who utilized disguises and extensive local insight to prey on vulnerable hikers. Yet the responsible individual was never identified or caught. Park officials remind visitors that genuine rangers carry authentic identification and can be contacted via established communication channels for verification. Hikers are encouraged to heed their instincts when approached by anyone claiming to hold authority, especially in remote areas where backup verification may not be readily available. The impersonator who targeted Mike and Lisa Thompson may still be active in wilderness areas throughout Appalachia, continuing to pose as an official as he pursues his own dangerous agenda. Until he is apprehended, the mountains remain a more hazardous space for those seeking solace in the backcountry. Hi there, I'm Kevin Brooks, and I'm 31 years old. I work with the Kentucky Department of Tourism as a historical researcher, focusing on documenting abandoned communities across Appalachia. My job leads me to some remote areas where settlements, once bustling with life, have been left behind as families move due to economic changes or natural disasters. Back in March 2021, I got a tip from a local historian about a settlement in the eastern Kentucky mountains that had supposedly been abandoned since the 1970s. According to what I learned, this community was founded in the 1800s by families wanting to live away from outside government involvement. They built homes, a school, a church, and everything they needed to thrive independently from modern society. The historian mentioned that I could find this place by following an old logging road branching off from a state highway near the Daniel Boone National Forest. He shared some rough directions and warned me about the bad condition of the road, stating that regular vehicles might not make it through. He also noted that the locals preferred not to discuss the settlement and seemed uncomfortable when asked about its history. I found the idea of documenting a previously unknown historical community that had preserved its independence for so long quite intriguing. I packed my camera gear, research materials, and camping supplies for what I thought would be a 2-day trip to locate the settlement, photograph any structures that remained, and gather information for the state historical records. I set off on a Thursday morning in late March, when the weather was lovely and the mountain roads were clear of snow. After finding the state highway the historian referenced, I spent hours driving along a 15-mile stretch of highway searching for the old logging road that would lead me to the forgotten settlement. Eventually, I spotted what seemed to be the right turnoff. The logging road was hard to see from the highway, tucked away behind tall pine trees and overgrown vegetation indicating it hadn't seen vehicles in years. There was no sign indicating where the road led, just a pair of ruts leading into the forest. I parked my car at the highway and chose to hike along the logging road to avoid getting stuck or damaging my vehicle on terrain I couldn't assess beforehand. The hike into the mountains took me most of the afternoon. The old logging road wound along a creek bed through thick forest, climbing up higher until the trees grew denser and the sunlight filtered through the leaves. I stopped often to take photos of interesting features and to note my progress with GPS coordinates, since I was venturing through areas that weren't accurately represented on any current maps. After hiking about 6 miles, I reached a clearing that had clearly been used for timber operations decades ago. Beyond that area, a narrower path continued further into the mountains, marked by blazes on tree trunks and scattered stones showing past human movement. I followed this path for another 2 miles until I stepped into a valley that revealed what I had been looking for: the abandoned settlement described by the historian. However, as I gazed at the cluster of buildings nestled among the trees, I quickly realized something was off.
This place was far from abandoned.
Smoke was rising from several chimneys, indicating there were fires burning inside the homes. Clothes hung on lines stretched between buildings, and I noticed recently tended gardens. People were moving around, engaged in daily activities of a vibrant community rather than remnants left to decay for 50 years. I crouched at the tree line for several minutes, watching and trying to grasp what I was witnessing. The buildings looked to be original structures from the 1800s, handcrafted from logs and exceptionally maintained. Yet, it was clear people were living there now, not mere historical artifacts waiting for documentation. My first instinct was to approach the settlement openly, introducing myself as a researcher eager to learn about its history. But something about what I was seeing made me hesitate. The people I observed were dressed in clothing that seemed stuck in another era, and their activities appeared intentionally disconnected from any modern technology or conveniences. Even more concerning was the complete lack of signs indicating contact with the outside world. No power lines, no telephone poles, no satellite dishes, and no vehicles. The residents seemed to be living exactly how their ancestors did in the 1800s, with no acknowledgement of the modern world just hours away. So, I decided to retreat to a spot where I could observe without being seen and take some time to understand what kind of community I had stumbled upon before making my introduction. I found a hidden nook among the rocks on the valley rim, where I could use binoculars to watch the daily life of the residents while remaining completely out of sight. Over the next few hours, what I observed convinced me I had discovered something far more significant than just an abandoned historical site. This settlement was home to a community that had chosen to live entirely apart from contemporary society, upholding the traditions and lifestyles of their 19th century ancestors without modern modifications. I witnessed families tending gardens, children playing traditional games, and adults conducting business using methods and tools unchanged over the last century. I even saw a blacksmith shop where someone was forging metal tools by hand, as well as a grist mill powered by a water wheel grinding grain into flour. There were pens for livestock like cattle, pigs, and chickens, providing meat, milk, and eggs for the community. Most importantly, interactions among residents indicated a well-organized social structure with established leadership and clear decision-making protocols. This was not just a temporary off-grid lifestyle experiment. This was a multi-generational community maintaining its way of life for decades, possibly since the settlement was deemed abandoned back in the 1970s. As evening fell, I watched the residents gather for what looked like a community meeting in the largest building, presumably a church or communal hall. Everyone attended, young and old, some needing help walking, others being carried by their parents. The meeting went on for over an hour, with various individuals stepping forward to speak and lively discussions taking place. Feeling it was best to remain hidden for another day, I set up camp in my concealed position to observe the community's daily dynamics further before making any decisions on how to proceed. I knew I was documenting something of potentially immense historical and anthropological significance, but I was also cautious. My presence might not be welcomed, or it could even prove dangerous if the community had chosen isolation for reasons tied to avoiding contact with outsiders. That night, I listened to the sounds drifting up from the valley below. A mix of typical rural sounds as the community wound down for the night. Dogs barking, cattle shifting in their pens, and occasional voices wishing each other good night. But there were also what felt like less ordinary sounds. Organized activities unfolding long after dark, with multiple figures moving around the settlement, lanterns in hand, and what sounded like construction or repairs taking place overnight. The next morning, I woke up before dawn to resume my observation of the community. The residents were already up, busy with their morning routines and preparing for another day of traditional life. Yet, I also noticed activities that I'd missed the day before. Sentinels stationed at key points around the valley perimeter and work crews maintaining defensive positions or fortifications. It became evident that the residents were aware they might get unwanted visitors and had taken measures accordingly. They had organized security and were actively monitoring for any signs of intrusion. My presence might have already been detected, and they could be waiting to see what I intended to do about their community. My suspicions were confirmed mid-morning when 3 men quietly emerged from the forest behind my observation post. They moved with purpose, surrounding me before I even realized they were there, armed with rifles and wearing traditional clothes like the settlement residents. The eldest of the 3 identified himself as an elder and inquired about my purpose in their territory. I explained I was a historical researcher, intending to document what I thought was an abandoned settlement, assuring them I meant no harm to their community. I showed them my identification, research materials, and camera gear as proof of my genuine academic intent. The elder listened intently without interruption, then informed me that their community didn't welcome outside visitors and preferred not to be documented or studied by anyone from the modern world. I reassured him of my respect for their desire for privacy, stating I would never publish any details about their location or existence without their permission. I asked if I could speak with community leaders to learn about their history and how they had managed to preserve their traditional lifestyle for so long. The elder deliberated for a few moments, consulting quietly with his companions in a tongue I couldn't comprehend. Ultimately, he said the community council would convene that evening to discuss my situation and determine what actions should be taken regarding my presence in their territory. I was granted permission to stay in the settlement as a guest until the council made its decision. I was escorted into the valley and brought to the community hall, where I was offered food and a place to rest while residents carried on with their daily lives. Throughout the day, several individuals approached me, asking questions about the outside world and sharing stories about their community and traditions. They exhibited curiosity about contemporary society, yet were deeply suspicious of its influence on their chosen way of life. I learned the settlement had indeed been established in the 1800s by families seeking to live independent of government control and had flourished by remaining completely self-sufficient, steering clear of any external contact that might undermine their traditional values. They shared that they had never truly abandoned the settlement, contrary to what outside historians believed. Instead, they had intentionally created the impression that their community no longer existed to deter visitors and preserve their isolation. This ruse had successfully shielded them for over 50 years, allowing them to sustain their traditional lifestyle without disturbance. That evening, the community council gathered to discuss my circumstances, and I was allowed to express my research interests. However, I was informed they considered my discovery of their community a serious threat to their continued privacy and safety. The council debated my situation for hours while I waited, uncertain of their decision and increasingly anxious about what might happen if they concluded I could not be trusted with their secrets. I had stumbled upon something that challenged everything historians thought they knew about isolated Appalachian communities. Yet I had also landed myself in a position where my safety depended on the goodwill of those who had ample reasons to consider me a threat. Finally, the council reached their determination, and the elder who had found me returned to share the outcome. They decided I could leave the settlement and return to the outside world, but only under strict conditions to protect their community from unwanted attention. I had to promise never to reveal the settlement's location or publish any information leading others to discover it. Additionally, I was to surrender all photographs and documentation I had gathered during my stay and allow a search of my equipment, ensure I hadn't concealed anything that could endanger their security. Most importantly, they warned me that if I ever violated these agreements, or if any evidence surfaced showing I had shared information about the settlement, the community would take necessary measures to safeguard their isolation, regardless of the consequences for me. I agreed to their terms out of necessity and understanding that they had created something precious that deserved protection from a world that might not appreciate or respect their choices. The next morning, I was escorted back to the logging road and watched until I reached the highway, then drove away. For more than 2 years now, I have kept my promise to that community and never spoken about my discoveries in those Kentucky mountains. But that experience reshaped my understanding of the hidden communities within remote corners of Appalachia, and the lengths some individuals will go to maintain their independence from the modern world. Somewhere in those mountains, people still live just as their ancestors did 2 centuries ago, and they plan to continue this lifestyle, regardless of outsiders' opinions about their choices. Hey there, I'm Tyler Martinez, and I'm super excited to tell you about an unforgettable adventure from September 2022 in the stunning Georgia mountains with my best friends, Amanda Porter and Jake Williams. As seniors at the University of Georgia, we had this amazing camping trip planned to celebrate our final semester before graduation. We were eagerly anticipating 3 fantastic days filled with hiking, relaxation, and the making of wonderful memories. Little did we know, we were in for the most spine-chilling experience of our lives. We picked a remote section of the Appalachian Trail in North Georgia, about 30 miles from the nearest town, to fully disconnect from civilization for a few days. We were all seasoned hikers. Amanda grew up in a hiking, loving family. Jake was an Eagle Scout with wilderness survival skills, and I started solo backpacking at 18. Our plan was simple: hike 5 miles into a tranquil area by a mountain stream to set up a cozy base camp. We aimed to enjoy 2 nights there before heading back on Sunday afternoon. With 3 days off from our jobs and classes, we were thrilled to unplug from technology and soak in the peace of the Appalachian wilderness. On Friday afternoon, we jumped into Jake's pickup truck, drove to the trailhead, and started our hike around 2:00 p.m. The weather was just perfect, with clear skies and temperatures in the low 70s. The well-maintained trail hugged a ridge, offering breathtaking views of the surrounding mountains and valleys. We bumped into a few other hikers during the first few miles, but as we went deeper into the backcountry, the trail felt like it was just for us. Our chosen campsite was everything we hoped for: a flat spot by a crystal, clear mountain stream, surrounded by beautiful hardwood trees starting to show their fall colors. It was secluded enough to ensure our privacy while still easy to navigate back to. We set up our 3 tents in a triangular layout around a central fire pit and followed trace principles by using an existing fire ring instead of creating a new one. By evening, our camp was looking lovely, our gear was organized, and we had gathered a nice supply of firewood to cook dinner and keep warm throughout the night. Our first evening unfolded just as we had imagined. We made a simple meal over the campfire, enjoyed some beers Jake had packed, and spent hours chatting about our post-graduation plans. The night was crisp and clear, perfect for gathering around the fire and diving into the kind of meaningful conversations that only happen when you're truly present with close friends. Eventually, around 11 p.m., we banked the fire and cozied up in our tents. Amanda was the first to fall asleep, totally exhausted from a week packed with final exams and job interviews. Jake and I chatted a little longer, nestled in our sleeping bags, enjoying quiet talks. The woods around us were just as expected, peaceful, except for the gentle sound of the stream flowing and a few nocturnal birds softly calling. It was the usual ambience we anticipated during our camping trip. But then, around midnight, everything changed. The familiar sounds faded away, leaving an eerie silence. The stream continued flowing, but all other forest noises, bugs, birds, and critters, stopped abruptly. It felt like every living creature sensed something was off. Jake noticed it too, shifting restlessly in his tent and whispering if I had heard anything unusual. I shared my thoughts on the sudden quiet, and we both listened intently for any indication of what disrupted the calm. That's when we heard the first voice. It came from deeper in the woods, maybe about 50 yards away. A human voice was uttering words we couldn't quite make out, sounding both familiar and strange at the same time. The voice echoed unsettlingly, making it hard to pinpoint its source. Jake called out, thinking perhaps another hiker was lost and needed help. He shared our campsite location and offered assistance or directions. But instead of receiving a grateful reply, the voice continued its strange calling, slowly moving around our camp as if tracking our position. Amanda woke up upon hearing Jake speaking and unzipped her tent to find out what was happening. We explained the mysterious voice, and all 3 of us listened as it continued to circle our campsite, keeping a distance of 40 or 50 yards from our tents. Soon, a second voice joined in, followed by a third, all speaking the same peculiar language, seemingly having a conversation amongst themselves. It was quite unsettling, even though we couldn't quite figure out what felt off about it. Jake shined his flashlight around the edge of our campsite, hoping to catch a glimpse of whoever was out there. But the light revealed only trees and bushes, while the voices persisted in their circling. When Jake called out again, asking who was there and what they wanted, the voices suddenly fell silent. That silence was even more unsettling than the strange voices had been. For about 20 or 30 minutes, we sat in the quiet, listening for any sounds that might indicate they had moved away. But the forest remained unnaturally hushed, as if nothing alive was near us. Eventually, fatigue and the thought that maybe we had just encountered other hikers pushed us to try and sleep. We decided to take turns keeping watch, just in case the voices returned, or if anything else came up during the night. I took the first watch, sitting beside the smoldering embers of our campfire, Jake's flashlight, and my emergency whistle at the ready. For about an hour, everything was quiet and normal. The usual forest sounds began to return. Chirping insects, hooting owls, and small animals rustling through the underbrush, suggesting whatever had disturbed us had finally moved on. But then around 3:00 a.m., the voices returned. This time they were louder, maybe 20 yards away. And there were even more of them. At least 6 or 7 different voices, all conversing in that same incomprehensible language as they moved in a clear, coordinated pattern around our campsite. I woke Jake and Amanda immediately, and we huddled together by the fire pit, listening to the voices enveloping us in the dark. Jake attempted to use his cell phone to call for help, but we were in a dead zone with no service. Our GPS accurately showed our location, but there was no way to convey our situation to anyone who could assist us. The voices went on for over an hour, sometimes moving closer, sometimes receding, but never fully disappearing. The most terrifying part was their rhythm and cadence that mimicked human speech, but fell just short, triggering a primitive fear within us. Around 400 a.m., one of the voices began uttering words we could recognize but in absurd contexts. It repeated our names, Tyler, Amanda, Jakey, but in strange combinations and inflections that no human would use. It felt like something was practicing our names without truly understanding their meaning. That's when Amanda broke down in tears. She had managed to hold it together through the earlier odd voices, but hearing something invisible in the forest call her name shattered her composure. Jake and I moved closer to her, forming a tight circle around the fire as we listened to our names being repeated from multiple directions. The voice that used our names began incorporating other words, piecing together grammatically correct sentences that made no sense whatsoever. Tyler Water Mountain, Amanda Fire Sleep Tent, Jake Morning Trail Walk. It felt like something was assembling human language from snippets it had overheard, but without grasping how words were supposed to convey meaning. As dawn approached, the voices gradually faded, becoming distant until they finally vanished around sunrise. The familiar forest sounds returned, and we heard birds begin their morning calls from the trees surrounding our campsite. Despite the arrival of daylight, none of us felt a sense of relief. We quickly packed up our gear, moving faster than ever, eager to start our hike back to the trailhead before the sun fully rose. We had no desire to linger. We longed to return to civilization and process the strange events we had just experienced. As we hiked the 5 miles back, we found ourselves constantly discussing the mysterious voices we had heard, unable to shake the impression they left. Those voices that eerily mimicked human speech for hours around our campsite. We wondered if other hikers were pulling an elaborate prank, but that theory didn't hold up. The logistics didn't seem feasible, and the quality of the voices was beyond anything a human could produce. We also contemplated whether some wildlife could mimic human sounds. Still, the coordinated and complex nature of the voices made that hard to accept. They seemed to communicate with an intent and intelligence that suggested something more. Finally reaching Jake's truck at the trailhead, we were both emotionally and physically spent from a sleepless night. The drive back to Athens was mostly quiet, with each of us lost in thoughts about how to share this extraordinary experience with friends and family who hadn't been there. In the weeks that followed, we dove into research, exploring every theory we could find: wildlife capable of mimicking voices, atmospheric conditions that create auditory illusions, or even possibilities of shared hallucinations. Yet, nothing we discovered satisfactorily explained the intelligent, sounding voices that encircled our camp. These voices seemed to know our names and were aware of our presence, defying any natural explanation we could uncover. That experience kept us from ever returning to that part of the Appalachian Trail, and it changed our camping plans forever. Amanda decided to stop hiking altogether after that weekend. Jake still enjoys outdoor activities, but refuses to camp in remote spots without a big group. As for me, I still hike occasionally, but only on well-traveled trails during daylight. I learned that nature has mysteries we may never fully comprehend, and seeking solitude in wild places can lead to unexpected encounters that challenge our understanding of the outdoors. Even now, I can hear those almost human voices in the dark moments before dawn in the Georgia mountains, and I hope I never encounter them again. But I will always remember how it felt to hear my name whispered by something that shouldn't have known I was there. The story of Patricia Hayes, a 45-year-old high school English teacher from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, began in the summer of 2019 when authorities received what seemed to be a routine missing hiker report. Patricia had taken a break from her teaching career to hike a portion of the Appalachian Trail in Pennsylvania, fulfilling a lifelong dream of spending extended time in the beautiful wilderness she cherished since childhood. However, what investigators later uncovered about her disappearance revealed a predatory network that had been operating in secluded Appalachian communities for years. Patricia wasn't an inexperienced hiker. She had actively participated in hiking clubs around Pittsburgh for over 20 years and had significant experience in backcountry camping and wilderness navigation. She had successfully completed several challenging long-distance hikes, including sections of the Continental Divide Trail and the John Muir Trail. Friends and colleagues described her as careful, well-prepared, and someone who would never take unnecessary risks while hiking alone. In June 2019, Patricia started her planned 60-mile hike from Delaware Water Gap to Port Clinton, a route that would take her through some of Pennsylvania's most remote and stunning landscapes. She had planned resupply packages at 2 points along the way and set up a detailed schedule for checking in with her sister back in Pittsburgh. The hike was anticipated to take 7 days, with Patricia planning to finish the section before returning home to gear up for the upcoming school year. On Tuesday evening, 2 days into her hike, Patricia made her first scheduled check-in call to her sister. She reported making good progress and enjoying delightful weather, mentioning she had received helpful trail advice from local residents. One individual she specifically mentioned was a man she called a trail angel, who lived near the trail and regularly assisted hikers with directions, weather updates, and emergency supplies. Trail angels are a common and welcome presence along long-distance hiking paths, typically local residents who love helping hikers and supporting the outdoor community. They often offer services such as water resupply, equipment repairs, rides to nearby towns, or simply friendly chats with fellow wilderness enthusiasts. Patricia's description of her encounter with this trail angel raised no immediate alarms. During her phone conversation with her sister, she explained that the man had approached her at a road crossing where the Appalachian Trail met a rural highway. He introduced himself as a nearby resident who often helped hikers with information about local trail conditions, water sources, and weather forecasts. He seemed knowledgeable about the trail, providing Patricia with detailed information on campsites, water availability, and potential hazards she might face ahead. Additionally, he offered a resupply service, suggesting that she could get in touch with him by phone if she needed more food, gear, or assistance during her trek through his area. Grateful for the interaction, Patricia accepted the man's business card, identifying him as a local trail maintenance volunteer. She mentioned to her sister how reassuring it was to know there were helpful people looking out for hikers, especially women hiking solo in remote regions. That was the last anyone heard from Patricia Hayes. When she missed her scheduled check-in call on Wednesday evening, her sister waited until Thursday morning to contact authorities. Patricia was known for her reliability in maintaining communication schedules, and her unexplained silence was completely out of character. Her sister shared detailed information about Patricia's planned route, schedule, and their last conversation with the police. Pennsylvania State Police launched a search and rescue operation on Thursday afternoon, working alongside local emergency services and volunteer search teams from hiking organizations. The initial search concentrated on Patricia's anticipated route between her last known position and her scheduled campsite for Wednesday night. Her campsite for that night was located exactly as indicated in her itinerary, exhibiting signs of proper camping, a put-out fire ring, and no food waste or improper trash disposal. Her tent had been correctly set up and taken down, showing no signs of disturbance or a hasty exit. However, beyond her Wednesday campsite, Patricia's planned path became difficult to trace. The trail in that area had recently undergone logging, obscuring traditional markers and altering the landscape. Searchers identified evidence of someone trying to navigate the right route, yet the tracks diverged from the established trail and led to areas not part of Patricia's itinerary. The search broadened to include regions Patricia would not have intentionally visited, given her documented experience and cautious hiking practices. Teams began searching areas that someone would only reach if they were lost, injured, or following incorrect directions from another person. On Friday evening, searchers found Patricia's backpack hanging from a tree branch, about 3 miles from the established trail, in an area that required considerable bushwhacking to access. The pack still contained essential gear, including navigation equipment, emergency supplies, and identification. There were no signs of struggle or damage, suggesting it had been placed there intentionally. This discovery prompted law enforcement to treat the case as a potential criminal investigation, rather than just another missing hiker situation. The location of her pack indicated it was unlikely Patricia would have willingly ventured so far from the marked trails given her hiking experience. Investigators began to closely examine Patricia's last phone conversation with her sister, especially her account of the trail angel. Although the business card Patricia mentioned wasn't found among her belongings, her sister was able to provide a detailed account of the man's offered services and where the encounter took place. A canvass of local residents around the area where Patricia met the trail angel revealed that no legitimate trail maintenance volunteer matched the description she had provided. Local hiking organizations confirmed they had no authorized volunteers working that section of trail when Patricia reported her encounter. Even more disturbingly, other hikers who had traversed the same area in recent months described encounters with a man resembling Patricia's trail angel, someone who approached them offering help and local insights. Patterns began to emerge from these accounts, indicating the man was systematically gathering information on hikers traveling alone through isolated stretches. He had approached numerous individuals over several months, always portraying himself as a forthcoming local resident while accumulating detailed knowledge about their movements and plans. Further investigation uncovered at least 3 other solo hikers who had gone missing in that same general area over the preceding 2 years. None of these cases showed signs of foul play and were classified as missing person situations, but investigators began to revisit them as possibly connected incidents. The missing hikers included a retired librarian from New Jersey, a graduate student from Virginia, and a freelance photographer from Maryland. All were experienced hikers who had been hiking solo on the Pennsylvania Appalachian Trail. In each instance, the last known whereabouts of the hiker correlated with areas where other witnesses had seen the mysterious trail angel. Investigators revealed that the man was running a sophisticated scheme targeting vulnerable hikers. He would meet people at road crossings and popular resupply spots, leveraging his knowledge of local trails and conditions to build credibility as a genuine trail angel. Once he garnered a hiker's trust, he would glean detailed information about their plans and schedules, and then use this intel to intercept hikers at specific locations along their intended paths, offering them extra help or leading them away from known trails under the guise of showing shortcuts or more attractive camping spots. By isolating his targets in hard to reach locations far from marked trails, he could make them disappear without any witnesses or signs of trouble. Law enforcement agencies coordinated a multi-state investigation to identify and catch the person responsible for these disappearances. This case received substantial media attention within the hiking community, prompting additional reports from individuals who had encountered a suspicious trail angel in various parts of Pennsylvania and neighboring states. Despite thorough investigations and significant resources poured into the case, the individual responsible for Patricia Hayes's disappearance was never identified or apprehended. Evidence pointed to a predatory network targeting solo hikers for years, but those responsible had skillfully avoided leaving any evidence that could lead to prosecution. Patricia Hayes was never found, nor were the other hikers who vanished under similar circumstances. The investigation remains open, with law enforcement continuing to follow leads and collaborate with hiking organizations to thwart future incidents. The disappearance of Patricia Hayes, alongside the surfacing of this predatory network targeting trail users, ushered in significant updates to safety recommendations from hiking organizations. Hikers are now encouraged to be wary of unsolicited assistance from strangers, verify anyone claiming to be associated with trail organizations, and refrain from deviating from planned routes based on advice from unknown individuals. Trail angel communities have also instituted verification systems to help hikers discern between genuine volunteers and those who may exploit the trail angel reputation to prey on potential victims. Many legitimate trail angels now carry identification from recognized hiking organizations and can provide references from hikers they have previously helped. The Pennsylvania section of the Appalachian Trail, where Patricia Hayes went missing, continues to welcome thousands of hikers each year. However, the community now engages with local residents more cautiously. This case serves as a poignant reminder that the trust and kindness that typically defines the hiking community can be manipulated by those with ill intentions. Somewhere in the mountains of Pennsylvania, there may be answers about what happened to Patricia Hayes and other hikers who misplaced their trust in the wrong person at an inopportune moment. Until those answers emerge, their families continue to hope for resolution. Meanwhile, as the hiking community takes steps to prevent similar tragedies for those seeking solitude and adventure in the Appalachian wilderness, the trail angel who targeted Patricia Hayes may very well still be operating in remote areas across Appalachia, utilizing the trusted reputation of genuine volunteers to spot and isolate vulnerable hikers. Victims place their trust in him, believing in the tradition of trail magic that makes the hiking community so special. Tragically, that same trust became their downfall when they crossed paths with someone who misused their generosity. Hello there. I'm Dr. David Coleman, and I've had a fantastic journey as a meteorologist with the National Weather Service for 30 years. After retiring, I started doing some consulting work with private companies. I'd like to share a story about my dear friend and colleague, Robert Jackson, that took place in the spring of 2021. It was during what was meant to be a standard assignment at a weather monitoring station nestled in the Virginia mountains. Unfortunately, Robert never returned from that trip, and the mystery of his disappearance still weighs heavily on my heart. Robert was just 38, an exceptionally skilled atmospheric scientist who had over 15 years of experience collecting data in remote areas. He was quite the adventurer, often spending extended periods in isolated spots throughout Appalachia, dedicated to studying mountain weather patterns, air quality, and climate change. Comfortable in solitude and a true expert in his field, he always kept in touch with our base office. In April 2021, our consulting firm was assigned to upgrade a weather monitoring station situated on a high ridge in the George Washington National Forest, about 40 miles from the nearest town. This station, established in the 1980s to gather long-term climate data from one of Virginia's highest points, had fallen into disrepair due to equipment damage from recent storms, interrupting data collection for a few months. Robert was eager to take on the assignment, which was expected to last around 10 days. He planned to hike to the station with replacement gear, assess the damage, conduct repairs, and then collect data for a week before heading back with the old equipment and his findings. This kind of independent field work was what he loved most about his career. The weather station was perched on a rocky outcrop at nearly 4,000 feet high, accessible only via a 6-mile hiking trail that branched off the Appalachian Trail. The facility included a small shelter for equipment, of various monitoring tools, and a radio system for daily communication with our office. Previous technicians described it as remote yet peaceful, boasting breathtaking views and ideal conditions for focused scientific work. Robert commenced his hike on a Monday morning in late April, carrying about 60 pounds of replacement gear along with his camping essentials. He was in great shape, estimating the hike would take around 4 hours, breaks included. His goal was to reach the station by early afternoon, assess the situation, and immediately dive into equipment repairs. I received his first radio check in that evening at 6:00 p.m., just as scheduled. He happily reported that he arrived at the station without any issues and began assessing the equipment damage. Most of it seemed to be due to ice buildup from winter storms, which had knocked several instruments offline and caused some structural damage to the shelter. Robert sounded motivated and optimistic during that initial contact, estimating repairs would only take 2 to 3 days, followed by a week of data collection before he would prepare to head back. Everything was on track, and he was satisfied with his working conditions at the remote station. The next evening's radio check-in was just as routine. Robert shared positive news about the progress he was making with repairs and mentioned successfully restoring most monitoring instruments back to their working order. He commented on the beautiful weather and stunning visibility from his high vantage point. He seemed to flourish in the isolation and took pleasure in the technical challenges he was facing. However, during our Wednesday evening's scheduled contact, I noticed something was off in Robert's voice. He completed his status update, confirming that the repairs were nearly done, and he was ready to start collecting data the next day. But then, he asked if I had any latest weather forecasts for his area. I checked and assured him that the conditions looked promising for the rest of the week, with clear skies and comfortable temperatures expected through the weekend. Strangely, Robert didn't sound reassured by this news. He mentioned that he had observed weather patterns that didn't align with our forecasts, pointing out unusual cloud formations and wind patterns that hinted at possible storms developing. As an experienced meteorologist himself, Robert certainly knew how to make independent weather observations, and his concerns typically would have driven me to explore potential forecasting errors. Still, his description of the weather didn't correlate with any data from nearby monitoring stations or satellite images. All information suggested calm and stable conditions in his vicinity. Thursday evening's radio contact revealed that Robert's weather concerns had become more intense. He mentioned that the station's instruments were recording fluctuations in atmospheric pressure that indicated severe weather looming. Yet he couldn't visually identify the storm system, nor did his readings match surrounding weather patterns. He sounded genuinely puzzled by the conflicting information. What was even more concerning was that he shared he had been hearing unusual sounds at night. He described eerie noises resembling wind coming from various directions, but without any movement in the surrounding forest. Additionally, he mentioned hearing voices calling from distant locations, though he couldn't pinpoint the source or what they were saying. I suggested he might be experiencing audio effects that are common at high elevations, where sound can travel strangely, creating acoustic illusions. Mountain weather stations sometimes experience odd audio phenomena, particularly because of temperature inversions and wind patterns that can make distant sounds seem much nearer. Robert accepted this explanation, but he still seemed skeptical it fully accounted for what he was experiencing. Unfortunately, Friday's scheduled radio check-in it never happened. After Robert failed to contact me at the expected time, I waited until Saturday morning to initiate emergency protocols. Robert was known for being reliable with his communication schedules, and it was completely out of character for him not to call without explanation. I reached out to local search and rescue authorities, providing them with all pertinent details regarding Robert's location and activities. A search team arrived at the weather station that Saturday afternoon and found clear evidence he had been there recently. But there was no sign of Robert himself. All his personal camping gear was still at the station, suggesting he didn't leave voluntarily. His technical equipment and research materials were also present, indicating he hadn't completed his planned data gathering work. The most perplexing issue was the state of the weather monitoring equipment Robert had been fixing. Some instruments had been entirely dismantled and reassembled in ways that completely contradicted meteorological logic. Several monitoring devices had been interconnected in ways that wouldn't yield useful data, and some equipment was set up in locations where it couldn't function properly. Those modifications suggested that someone with technical knowledge had been tinkering, but the resulting setups appeared to serve no scientific purpose. It felt as though Robert had been experimenting with the instruments, but not in a way that aligned with weather monitoring. Or perhaps he was following instructions from someone who did not grasp how meteorological equipment ought to work. Searchers also found Robert's personal journal inside the equipment shelter, where he had documented his activities until Friday morning. His final entries indicated he was increasingly troubled by peculiar atmospheric readings he couldn't reconcile with conventional meteorological concepts. He wrote about pressure changes that seemed to follow unusual patterns, rather than responding like normal weather systems, and temperature shifts that occurred in small, localized areas without any apparent cause. Most concerning were the entries reflecting on the strange sounds he had mentioned during our radio conversations. He noted hearing what seemed to be coordinated calling from multiple sources, voices communicating using patterns that resembled language but didn't sound distinctly human. He felt the voices getting closer each night, and even suspected they were drawn to the electronic equipment he was operating. The last entry in Robert's journal, dated that Friday morning, was noticeably erratic and anxious. He recounted a night filled with the voices, seemingly encircling the weather station, and he observed that they began to mimic some of the sounds from his monitoring devices, as if they were adapting to communicate using similar frequencies. He concluded his entry with the decision to modify the weather equipment, aiming to record and analyze the captivating sounds he had noticed. He believed whatever was creating the voices was utilizing electromagnetic frequencies that could be detected and examined using his scientific instruments. That entry was the last record of Robert's thoughts and the last evidence of his presence at the station. The search for Robert Jackson continued for 2 weeks, covering vast stretches of mountainous terrain surrounding the monitoring station. Despite the efforts of helicopters, ground teams, and tracking dogs, no sign of him was found beyond the equipment shelter. His camping gear, clothing, food supplies, and personal belongings were all left behind, suggesting he left quickly without preparing for travel. Upon investigation of the modified weather equipment, it was revealed that Robert had transformed the monitoring station into a sophisticated audio detection and recording setup. The modifications indicated significant technical skill and creativity, implying they were made over several days of concentrated work. However, the recorded data generated by Robert's makeshift system was utterly unintelligible, comprising audio frequencies that didn't match any known natural or artificial sources. Specialists in acoustic research and signal processing attempted to analyze the recordings, but they couldn't determine the source or nature of the sounds Robert had aimed to study. The recordings exhibited patterns suggesting intelligent communication, yet at frequencies and structures entirely different from any recorded in human or animal vocalizations. Some analysts observed a resemblance between Robert's recordings and electromagnetic phenomena connected with unusual atmospheric conditions. But no weather patterns could account for the effects he described. Other experts proposed that the recordings might signify interference from unknown electronic sources, yet no such sources were located in the remote area of the weather station. And so, the case of Robert Jackson's disappearance remains open and unresolved. His family and colleagues continue to seek answers about the events of those last days at the weather station. This incident led to some policy changes, ensuring that multiple personnel are assigned to isolated monitoring stations and enhancing communication protocols for scientists working in remote locations. I've gone through Robert's journal entries and audio recordings many times, trying to understand what he experienced during his last days in the Virginia mountains. His scientific background and methodical approach to exploring unusual phenomena make his notes intriguing. However, the conclusions he seemed to draw challenge much of what we believe we know about our surroundings. The weather monitoring station where Robert Jackson disappeared is still operational, and it's now run by rotating teams of technicians to ensure no one spends too much time alone in that remote location. Interestingly, the equipment has never captured the strange audio phenomena Robert reported, which makes me think that whatever he encountered was drawn specifically to him or his investigative pursuits. Somewhere in those Virginia mountains may lie the answers about Robert Jackson and his findings during that last week at the weather station. Until we uncover those answers, his disappearance serves as a poignant reminder that, even in our modern world of advanced scientific knowledge, there are still mysteries in the remote areas of Appalachia that remain unexplained. The sounds recorded by Robert in his final days suggest he may have interacted with something that was aware of him and engaged with his attempts to communicate. Whether that entity is a natural phenomenon, unknown technology, or an intelligence we have yet to comprehend is still a mystery. Robert Jackson was an exceptional scientist dedicated to solving the mysteries of the natural world through careful observation and analysis. His final research, conducted in solitude at that isolated mountain weather station, might have touched on evidence of phenomena that science isn't quite ready to address or explain. The cost of that discovery was his disappearance into the very mountains he had devoted his career to studying.